novel by Mary Shelley, opens in the Russian city of St. Petersburg, sometime late in the 1700s. Robert Walton, an ambitious young Englishman, stopped in St. Petersburg on the first leg of a journey of exploration to the North Pole. This venture was to be a test of personal strength, and Walton had prepared for the journey for quite some time. Though a man of means, he had accompanied whale fishers on dangerous expeditions to the North Sea, simply to build up his courage and experience. From St. Petersburg, Walton traveled to the coastal town of Archangel to hire a crew of brave and steady sailors and outfit a ship for exploration in the ice-covered regions of the Arctic Sea. He and his men set sail in late summer and immediately encountered the floating sheets of ice that marked this journey northward. His men were not dismayed, and the ship sailed on. A month later, however, Walton's ship, as well as his ambitions, were frozen in the Arctic waters. As the crew awaited a change in weather, they sighted in the distance a gigantic creature traveling by dog sled. The next morning, another sled, bearing a half-frozen man, drifted close enough to the ship for Walton to take him aboard. The miserable man called himself Victor Frankenstein. And later, when he was restored, he told why he was pursuing the creature they had seen the day before. Frankenstein proceeded to tell his tale of horror. I am a Genovese by birth, and my family is one of the most distinguished of that republic. My father was respected by all who knew him for his integrity and attention to public business. Later in life, my father took a young and delicate wife, Caroline Beaufort. Like an exotic plant, she was loved and protected by all who knew her. After their union, they sought the pleasant climate of Italy. I, their eldest child, was born in Naples, and I remained several years their only and much-loved son. But when I was about 5 years old, Elizabeth Lavenza, a lovely golden-haired child, was taken into my mother's care. Elizabeth, my more than sister, shared all my occupations. Our early years were spent in great happiness with my two younger brothers in the Swiss countryside of Bellerive. Our closest friend was Henry Clerval, the son of a Geneva merchant. As a child, my temper was sometimes violent. As I grew, it was the secrets of heaven and earth that I desired to learn. Meanwhile, Clerval occupied himself with the virtues and actions of men. He wrote plays of the heroes of the Round Table, and we, Clerval, Elizabeth, and I, acted them. I feel exquisite pleasure in dwelling on these recollections of childhood before misfortune had tainted my mind and changed its bright visions into gloomy tragedy. In those years, I read all of my father's books of science. I entered with the greatest passion into stories of the search for the source of life. What glory if I could someday banish disease from the human frame and render man invulnerable to death. When I was 15, I witnessed a violent thunderstorm. A stream of fire blasted an old oak 20 yards from my home, and in the dazzling light, the tree turned to ashes. On this occasion, a man of research was with us. He explained the theory of electricity, and I at once took up the study. 2 years later, my parents resolved that I should become a student at the University of Ingolstadt. My departure was fixed at an early date, but before the date arrived, the first omen of misfortune occurred. Elizabeth was dying of scarlet fever, and my mother attended her sickbed day and night. Although Elizabeth was saved, my mother sickened. On her deathbed, she joined the hands of Elizabeth and myself, telling us that her fondest hopes of future happiness were placed on the prospect of our union in marriage. After a few weeks of the saddest mourning, the day of my departure for Ingolstadt arrived. I descended to the carriage which was to convey me away. My father blessed me. Clerval pressed my hand once more. My Elizabeth renewed her entreaties that I write often. The journey to Ingolstadt passed quickly, and at length the high white steeple of the town met my eyes. I alighted from the carriage and was conducted to my solitary apartment. During the next several days, I asked for a list of books on the history of chemistry from a Professor Waldman. He took me into his laboratory, exciting my interest in his work. Thus ended a day that decided my future destiny. From that day, natural philosophy, and particularly chemistry, became my sole occupation. I read with ardor, attended the lectures, and cultivated the acquaintance of men of science of the university. I soon became so ardent and eager that the stars often disappeared in the light of morning while I was yet engaged in my laboratory. 2 years passed in this manner. My research had moved ahead quickly, and now I was led to examine the cause of the decay of the human body. I spent days and nights collecting bones in vaults and charnel houses. Then a sudden light broke in upon me. I was surprised that among so many men of genius that I alone should discover so astonishing a secret. After days and nights of incredible labor, I became capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. Soon after, armed with my passion to succeed, I began the creation of a human being. I resolved to make the being of a gigantic stature, about 8 feet in height and proportionately large. I collected my material and began. While I pursued my undertaking, my cheek grew pale with study and confinement. Every night, I was oppressed by a slow fever. Who can conceive my horror as I dabbled among the damp of the grave, or probed the secrets of the dissecting room? My limbs now tremble, and my eyes swim with the remembrance. At last, I brought my work near to a conclusion. It was a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toil. And then, the moment of life came. By the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. I stepped away in horror. I had worked hard for 2 years, but now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless disgust filled my heart. I rushed out of the room, wishing the deed undone. I threw myself on my bed to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. I slept indeed, and then started from my sleep in horror. By the dim and yellow light of the moon, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created. He held up the curtain of the bed. His jaws opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds. But I did not hear. I escaped to the courtyard below, passing the night wretchedly. Morning dawned, but I did not dare return to my apartment. I walked to ease the load that weighed upon my mind. Continuing thus, I came at length opposite to the inn and paused, my eyes fixed on a coach that was coming towards me. In it, I perceived Henry Clerval, my boyhood friend, who had come to study at the university. Nothing could equal my delight on seeing Clerval. His presence brought back to my thoughts my father, Elizabeth, and all those scenes of home so dear to my recollection. We embraced, and in a moment I forgot my horror. "It gives me the greatest delight to see you. Tell me how you left my father, brothers, and Elizabeth." "Very well, only uneasy that they hear from you so seldom," said Clerval. "I did not before remark how very ill you appear. You look as if you'd been awake for several nights." "You've guessed right. But I sincerely hope that I am at length free." I trembled and imagined I saw the monster. I could not speak of the occurrences of the preceding night. We walked at a quick pace and arrived at my college. I then reflected that the creature whom I had left in my apartment might still be there, alive. I darted up towards my own room, with Henry at my heels. "My dear Victor, what, for God's sake, is the matter?" exclaimed Clerval. "Oh, do not ask me! Oh, save me! Save me!" I shook furiously and fell down into a fit, my nerves shattered. This was the commencement of a nervous fever, which confined me for several months. During all that time, Henry was my only nurse. He could not have been more kind and attentive, though it meant sacrificing his studies for my welfare. Slowly, I recovered, and Clerval placed into my hands a letter from dear Elizabeth. She assured me of the good health of my loved ones, especially of my young brothers, Ernest and William, and she wrote of the arrival of a beloved servant, Justine Moritz, into the household. I missed my family and planned to return to them, but it was May before I felt I could leave Clerval in his new home, the scholarly environment that had so changed my own life. A few days before my departure for Geneva, I found a letter from my father, filled with heartbreaking news. William, my younger beloved brother, was dead. That sweet child. He was murdered. The events are almost too painful to record. William had become lost on a walk in the countryside, and it was hours before his body was found with the print of the murderer's fingers on his young neck. It was all the more astonishing to hear that Elizabeth cried that it was she herself that had caused the murder of the young boy. She explained that William had teased her to let him wear a valuable locket of his mother's. This was, then, the temptation which urged the murderer to the deed. My father wrote that I alone could console Elizabeth, and I prepared for the melancholy journey to Geneva and bade farewell to Clerval. I arrived in the environs of Geneva in a storm, but stopped briefly to view my old homestead. Through the rain, I saw a figure move behind a clump of trees, and a flash of lightning illuminated its gigantic stature. Its hideous deformity instantly told me that it was the wretch, the filthy demon to whom I had given life. Suddenly I knew, oh, incredible thought, it was he who had murdered my brother. I thought of pursuing the devil, but another flash discovered him at the summit of a hill, and then he disappeared. Alas! I had turned loose into the world a depraved fiend. I arrived at my father's home as day dawned. My first thought was to disclose what I knew of the murderer and cause instant pursuit to be made. But alas, who would believe me? And pursuit of this fiend was futile. I resolved to be silent. With these somber thoughts, I was welcomed by my father with the confusing news that the murderer had been found. Our servant, Justine Moritz, was to be tried for the hideous crime. The locket which William had worn was found on her person. I called on the magistrate to speak in Justine's behalf, but the trial date was set 2 weeks hence, and there was little time to reverse such an injustice. 1,000 times rather would I have confessed myself guilty of the crime, but I was absent when it was committed, and such a declaration would have been considered the ravings of a madman. At her trial, Justine could give no account of the locket. She was condemned to perish on the scaffold as a murderess. Words could not convey my heart-sickening sadness. In the next days I cursed myself as I beheld those I loved grieving at the graves of William and Justine, and I thought of them silently as my first 2 victims. In bereavement, we retired to our house in Bellerive, and I sought solitude in the near Alpine valleys. My wanderings were directed towards the lonely valley of Chamonix. As the mist gave way to torrents of rain, I resolved to ascend to the summit of Montanvert. It was nearly noon when I arrived at the top, and I suddenly beheld the huge figure of a man at some distance advancing towards me with superhuman speed. I trembled with rage and horror. It was the wretch whom I had created. "Devil! Do you dare approach me? Begone, vile insect! Or rather, stay, that I may beat you to dust!" The monster spoke.
"I expected this. You propose to kill me. Do your duty towards me, and I will do mine towards the rest of mankind. If you will comply with my conditions, I will leave you at peace. But if you refuse, I will glut the maw of death until it be filled with the blood of your remaining friends."
"Wretched monster! Fiend that thou art!"
"Be calm. I entreat you to hear me. I am thy creature. My soul glowed with love and humanity. Please, hear my tale."
As he said this, he led the way across the ice. I followed. I was partly urged by curiosity, and compassion confirmed my resolution. We entered a hut which he had made for himself, and I consented to listen. Seating myself by the fire which my odious companion had lighted, he thus began his tale.
It is with considerable difficulty that I remember my beginnings. All events appear confused. Before, dark and opaque bodies had surrounded me. And now I found that I could wander freely. I sought a shaded place, since light pained my eyes. This was the forest near Ingolstadt, and here I lay by the side of a brook, resting from my fatigue. Food was scarce, and I often spent the day searching for a few acorns. I vowed to find a place where my needs would be more easily met. At length I perceived a small hut, but I had hardly placed my foot within the door before the children shrieked and one of the women fainted. The whole village was roused. Some fled, some attacked me, until, bruised by stones, I escaped to the open country. Hurt and miserable, I took refuge in a low hovel which joined a cottage of neat and pleasant appearance.
The monster I had created then recounted its discovery of an isolated family, the de Lacys. In a forgotten woodshed next to their cottage, it secretly spied on their most intimate lives, hoping one day to reveal itself to them. Incredibly, it learned to read and write by observing these people at their work. The brain of the monster began to awaken. Papers the monster had taken from my laboratory yielded clues to its origins, and it began to know how alone it was, and always would be. The sad day came when my creature approached the de Lacys. When they spurned it, my creature, once a trusting being, turned against man and nature, burning down the cottage, tearing up the garden, then wandering across the desolate landscape, until it met my brother William. Oh, astonishing chance of fate! Dear, lovely child, to die so miserably, to feel the murderer's grasp. Poor William. This creature had meant to take sweet William away as a companion. On conversing with the child, he learned that he was my brother. Then, in hellish triumph, he strangled the boy and placed the child's locket on sleeping Justine, thus ensuring her conviction for his murder. The monster haunted the spot where these scenes had taken place, and at length wandered towards these mountains.
I am alone and miserable, but one as deformed and horrible as myself would love me. Frankenstein, you must create a mate for me, one of the same species, one with the same defects.
I was bewildered and would not understand his proposition. The latter part of his tale had enraged me once more, in spite of the peaceful beginning of his narration. I do refuse it. Shall I create another like yourself? Your joint wickedness might desolate the world. Begone! I will never consent.
You are wrong, Frankenstein. Shall I respect a man when he condemns me? Accept, or I will work at your destruction. What I ask of you is reasonable and moderate. Oh, do not deny me my request.
I was moved. I shuddered when I thought of the possible consequences of my consent, but I felt that there was some justice in his argument. I consent to your demand, on your solemn oath to quit every place in the neighborhood of man as soon as I shall deliver into your hands a female who will accompany you in your exile.
I swear by the sun that if you grant my prayer, you shall never behold me again. Depart and commence your labors. Fear not. When you are ready, I shall appear.
Saying this, he suddenly quitted me, and soon, with heart, I began my own descent from the mountaintop.